Welcome back, folks. I gotta say, today's news to me was a bit devastating. Now, we have to wait to see what the timeline is for Sean Manaea, but his injury is potentially devastating. Now, I am looking this at a macro level. I am looking at the big picture right now. Of course, this may be a couple week injury. Sean Manaea could be back mid-April, and it could be water under the bridge. But folks, these injuries, and it looks like Sean Manaea was diagnosed with an oblique strain. That injury is tricky, folks. It is tricky. So in this video, we are going to get into details. I want to look at some of the history of oblique strains. Which pitchers have had them in the past? How long was the time frame? Let's look at Sean Manaea's diagnosis and try to figure out how our pitching staff will look. What will our options be? And right now, where do we stand? Folks, a lot of questions. I understand you have a lot of questions. First, let me note I am not a doctor. This is just for fun and opinion, Joe, for entertainment. So let me put that out there. So anybody's saying, oh, you don't know this, you don't know this. Of course, I'm not a doctor. I'm just going to go over what I see, what my research tells me. And of course, it can be wrong. I am not a doctor. I have to repeat that for some folks. As always, folks, get this started off right. I know we don't feel well because of this latest news, but still, let's support this channel, support the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you like new, interesting content, and if you are a passionate Major League Baseball fan, especially a New York Mets fan. Okay, folks, now let's get into the news today, and it wasn't good. We'll start off by going over what happened, and let's get some quotes from Sean Manaea himself and, of course, his manager, Carlos Mendoza. All right, so it's tough, but the Mets are going to be planning the 2025 season without their ace, without their workhorse from last year, and that is Sean Manaea. From my research, this could be wrong, but the Mets have always been devastated. Repeat, devastated from injury in spring training when it comes to starting pitching. And this number may be wrong, but from my calculations, and this is the number that came up, 98 starting pitchers have been injured in spring training in the last 10 years for the New York Mets. 98 in the last 10 years. We have already seen two major injuries to our starting rotation, but the Mets have always been very susceptible to the injury bug when it comes to their starting rotation. So again, we see that right now. So Sean Manaea has been shut down from throwing for at least a couple of weeks, according to manager Carlos Mendoza, with an oblique strain. Now that is important in itself because from what I've seen, and maybe I missed it, I did not see a grade to that oblique strain. So I don't know how serious it is. There were some comments made by Sean Manaea alluding to this injury not being more of the severity. But, again, we have to, kind of see how this goes throughout time. All right. So Manaea felt something in his oblique early in camp, but he continued throwing. The Mets eventually went to the MRI, but this has been something that has been plaguing Manaea for the last couple weeks. Manaea said he's been dealing with this since the beginning of spring training. His quote, "It didn't really get worse. It just kind of plateaued. The worst part is throughout the days, it just never got better over the last couple weeks." So this is the good news, and I believe Carlos Mendoza said this. The good news is the tendon is not involved. The rib cage is not involved. So it's straight muscle, Mendoza said. He's going to be shut down for a couple weeks. And then we reassess that. So, I guess it could have been worse. It doesn't involve the rib cage. It doesn't involve the tendon, but it still involves the muscle. When you have a muscle tear, obviously there are different grades to a muscle tear, usually grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Um, And maybe, you know what? Maybe that's where I'm confused, because maybe the tendons grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, but whatever. That's where I said I'm not a doctor. But still, when I look at how long pitchers have taken to recover, according to MLB, the average timeline is 35 days. The average timeline is 35 days for a pitcher usually to recover from an injury like this. And if you look at past injuries that have been diagnosed similarly, there were a couple players that I saw. Max Muncy last year had an oblique strain. He's of course he's not a pitcher. He is a hitter. He played in 73 games. Other pitchers that have been diagnosed in the past. Max Scherzer was diagnosed in 2021 with an oblique injury. That injury took him it took him a little over a month. Tyler Glasnow, he had that injury in 2023. This is a little more specific. That injury took 3 months. David Peterson had a right oblique strain in 2021 between grade 1 and grade 2, and that took him about 8 weeks. So, folks, the timetable where I'm seeing is about a little over a month to 4 months. So a little over a month to 4 months, depending on how severe it is. But also, too, I've seen in other people's situations where they weren't MLB pitchers, but they were saying that this injury tends to linger. So if he comes back too soon, or maybe he re-injures this thing, this could be a situation where you don't have your ace for the entire season. And folks, that is not good, because this was a guy where we had penciled in as our ace. And maybe he wasn't even an ace, because last year was his first season where he actually could be considered an ace. Before that, Manaea was like, oh, he's a good 3, maybe a 2 on a good day. But last year, when he changed his mechanics and he worked with our pitching lab, he became an ace. And I said last year, the only thing with him changing his mechanics, going to sidearm, and I said he's a bit older and there is a risk for injury when you do something new, a repetitive movement over and over. Especially as an older guy, you are susceptible to injury. Chris Sale, a guy who's a very herky-jerky guy, he's been susceptible to injury, the last couple of years on a tremendous scale. So we hope that this is not the beginning of something more. But, if you look at it in a box, just plain on itself, losing Sean Manaea is devastating. So you don't have that clear bona fide ace, and you're not sure the timeline. Regardless of all the medical terms, this and that, there is uncertainty. And then I have to say this. So first, let's look at the rotation, and then I'm going to allude to this fact. The price just went up, because we are going to talk about other options, but just keep in mind, the price just went up. Right now is another good time to like and subscribe, help support our videos and help our channel grow. Okay, so before we get into the price just went up, now let's look at the rotation. As it stands, you have Kodai Senga as your number 1 in your rotation, Clay Holmes as your number 2, David Peterson now slots into your number 3, and in number 4 spots you have McGill, Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn. I mean, not good options, folks. Not good options. As Carlos Mendoza said, you don't like to see 2 of your guys in your rotation that you were counting on go down. But he alluded to, well, now you have to test the depth. I said with the Frankie Montas injury, it was disappointing. It was very disappointing. And was it devastating? Or was it just a quick fix? At the end of the day, I said, you know what? It's only devastating if it leads to more injuries, because a Frankie Montas injury on top of a Sean Manaea injury is a lot worse. So when you couple these injuries, even if it's a guy to your fifth starting rotation, it is now a lot worse because now you have multiple injuries to your rotation. And if you have another injury, now you are losing 60% of your rotation. And let's look at what I was talking about. You have Senga, you have Holmes, you have Peterson, Canning, and McGill. That's your starting rotation. Would I be surprised tomorrow if Kodai Senga is suffering some type of soreness? No, he pitched 5 innings last year. I would not be surprised if Senga goes down. Peterson, who was injured last year, was injured in 2021, the last couple of seasons. Would I be surprised if Peterson gets injured in the next couple of weeks? No, because Sanger and Peterson were the two guys who have been injured in the last couple of years. The only two guys last year who were kind of healthy the whole year were Manaea and Montas, and those guys are done, at least for the next couple of weeks. So, I mean, folks, we could look at it with rose-colored glasses, but on the surface right now, it is not good. The Mets rotation, when fully healthy, was already a cause for concern, was already a huge question mark, oh, what if Senga stays healthy? What if Holmes doesn't transition well? And then you have a bunch of question marks. Now these question marks are beginning to be answered. You're not going to have Montas for a couple of months. You may not have Manaea for a couple of months. In Manaea, I'll pump the brakes on because best case scenario, we have 35 days. He comes back late April. That's probably best case scenario. Worst case scenario, he's out a couple months, misses half the season. No good. All right, so now let's get into what I was saying a couple months ago. And that alludes to the fact that the price just went up. When I was advocating for a trade or I was advocating for another move to bolster the rotation, I said David Stearns and Steve Cohen have to be dealing and negotiating from a position of strength rather than a position of desperation. Now, when when David Stearns picks up the phone, San Diego, AJ Preller, or they picks up the phone to another GM across the MLB landscape, now he is dealing or negotiating from a position of desperation. AJ Preller, another GM's like, all right, now you have to, if you want the deal to go through, this is what the price is. And the price just went up. That's how it goes. It's supply and demand. Supply and demand. And you know what? Right now, the demand for starting pitchers on the Mets just went up. Steve Cohen and David Stearns specifically, they're going to allude to internal options. They're going to say, well, no, we're fine. We still have Canning, we still have Blackburn, but it's funny. Canning, who was a 6th or 7th option, now he's a number 4 option in your rotation. So that depth is not depth right now. It's not depth. And Sproat, unless are we talking about Sproat being a starter, maybe we're going to be trying really seriously be looking at a guy like Sproat. I mean, Tidwell was another guy, Blade Tidwell. He pitched today, did not pitch well. Those guys are really going to be highlighted. Today, Blade Tidwell pitched 2 innings, 4 hits, 3 earned runs. Did not look good. He surrendered a home run. Now with the injuries to the starting rotation, you are going to be looking at guys like Blade Tidwell in the minors, Sproat. You're going to be looking at Dom Hamill. Dom Hamill pitched today, 1 inning, a scoreless inning, decent. Maybe are you going to be looking at a Jose Budo? Are you going to ramp him up? If the Mets cannot get an outside option, and we still are going to be talking about those options, but if the price is too much, if they're asking for Sproat, if they're asking for Jet Williams, if they're asking for Drew Gilbert, if they're asking for all your top guys for a 1-year rental, you are going to have to look internal. And now at this point, even if you're a guy sitting on the free agent market like a Jose Quintana, I would say your price went up as well. Your price went up as well. So the fact that the Mets didn't, get him after the Frankie Montas injury, saying, we're fine. We got plenty of guys. We got Griffin Canning. We got Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga as our top. We're fine. By them not seizing the moment, Quintana's price even went up. And honestly, I don't know why. I mean, let's give him a bit of time, but that Quintana, it seems like such an obvious move. And even signing a Quintana wouldn't be solving the equation. That wouldn't be solving. That would just be giving you a guy who can eat innings. And that's what we're going to need right now. We're going to need a guy who can eat innings. But let's, that being as in May, let's look at a couple obvious targets. So, and I believe, and I want to just be fair. So, according to Will Salmon of the Athletics, the Mets hope Manaea will be back at some point in April. Okay, so that's what I said. Best case scenario, based on the timelines that are out there, it would be late April. Okay. So, I mean, here we go. There's going to be a couple obvious candidates. The number one candidate that keeps popping up, and this is where the price just went up. And you see this team, the San Diego Padres, and the candidate being Dylan Cease. The Padres are stacking their rotation because they've dealt with pitching injuries in the past. They know Yu Darvish is 40 years old. They just signed Nick Pivetta, and their thing is they're going to keep Dylan Cease. They're going to keep Michael King. But here's the deal: if you are talking to the public, whether you're David Stearns or whether you're AJ Preller is going to put on a front like, "Oh, we're fine. We're not trading anybody. I mean, we're not trading anybody, right?" What that does is that makes it seem like the Padres do not want to make a trade, and that makes it seem like the price tag will go up if you want to deal with the Padres. If you juxtapose that with the Mets front, they should be like, all right, we're fine. We have enough depth. We have a bunch of options. The injuries aren't that bad. We are not desperate. But internally, we know that the Mets, who are striving to be a World Series team in a very highly competitive, we have to remember this, folks. Everybody who's saying it's not a big deal, remember last year that you had to win basically 90 games to get into the playoffs, right? So these games in the beginning of the season are going to matter. And the National League is a lot tougher than the American League. Teams like the Reds, the Giants, the Padres, the Diamondbacks, the Braves, the Phillies, the Dodgers, even the Nationals are looking better. The Brewers, the Cardinals may surprise you. There are so many damn teams to compete with. If you have a bad month or two because your rotation is not up to par, that could leave you on the outside looking in. And with a $330 million payroll, at least, because I expect the Mets to continue to add on, it is not acceptable to miss the playoffs no matter what. No matter what. So I comment on that down below because that is a significant thing to note. I remember, getting into the playoffs is not a cupcake walk in the National League. All right. So I don't want to hear, 2 months goes by. It's fine if you only have 2 or 3 guys in your rotation. And then not to mention, one of those guys is a guy who pitched 5 innings last year. So that guy will not be a guy who's going 7, 8 innings strong. He's a guy who will be on a pitch count and innings count early on. So, keep that in mind as well. And then 2 or 3/5 of the rotation is going to be guys who weren't supposed to be there. I said the only saving grace is if you have Brandon Sproat have, literally step up, become a big boy. And, the guy's got all the talent in the world. If he surprises, turns heads, that could be the Mets saving grace. But that's a huge if. That is a huge if. All right. So again, let's continue to go on our options. So Dylan Cease being one of the options, and the Mets, they have a couple options. So the Mets, but there's no other pitcher that we've kind of heard in the last couple months more than Cease. Cease last year, he was a workhorse. Guy had 200 strikeouts. The guy traditionally has 200 strikeouts. He finished in the top 5 in Cy Young Award voting twice in the last 5 years as well. But Cease, kind of like, if you're a Mets fan, it's almost like a pipe dream. It's really kind of like a pipe dream because, as I mentioned before, the Padres are saying that they're set. They're looking to make the playoffs. They have a tough division with the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Dodgers. So everybody's saying that the Mets would have to make the Padres that type of Godfather offer. So that's where it's going to be tough. So I'm going to say that right now. Dylan Cease, Michael King. Yes, there are options, but are you going to want to give up that huge package that's going to start with a guy like Jet Williams? I mean, if you really want to get the conversation starting, you give up a Brandon Sproat. But folks, I think that's silly. That's silly to give him up for a 1-year rental. All right, so Dylan Cease looks like it's not going to happen. Another guy, and this guy is a guy that you might be able to work with. All winter, the Diamondbacks have been trying to get rid of Montgomery. He had a 6.23 ERA in his disastrous 2024 debut in Arizona. His $22.5 million salary for the upcoming season is very high, but so is his motivation to return to his 2023 form. Montgomery proved during his 2023 World Series run that he can handle the big stage, and that's where the Mets should live all season. Coming to Queens and taking over a mid-rotation spot for the Mets could be an ideal situation for Montgomery to thrive. So that is really kind of a tough one for me. And I'm going through like potential options. So not all of them are going to be stellar, right? Montgomery was one of the pitchers last year that a lot of fans wanted. They said that he's a very solid player proven guy. He was the guy I never wanted. Never, ever, ever wanted last year. Had a very bad season. Very bad season. Some could say he didn't properly ramp up. We all know that the negotiations, for his contract ran very long. Here's the deal with him. You have to pay him a lot this year, but it's only 1 year. He's not signed for 2026. So if he continues to falter, he's gone. He is gone after this year. Last year, he pitched in a total of 117 innings, and it wasn't good. It really wasn't good. Let me see if I can find anything on Baseball Savant where the guy did anything good. And then I'm going to go talk about what a package would look like. And then we have more options as well. And drop down in the comments. Would you do this trade? Would you not do this trade? Would you do it if something happened? Like, I think the Mets could virtually get Jordan Montgomery for nothing if they take on his salary. Nothing. So that, I think, is an option. Okay. So, all right. So what can I take from a guy who didn't have a great season? Okay, so what I'm noticing is his bread and butter pitch is his sinker. So what I'm noticing in from 2023 to 2024, in 2023, he threw his sinker a lot more. He threw his sinker a lot more. He threw it 42% in 2023. In 2024, he only threw his sinker 31% of the time. So his so-called bread and butter pitch, it's kind of curious. Why did he throw that not as much? Is that something that could be tweaked? You put him in the Mets pitching lab, maybe you could get that 23 version out of him. Also, his repertoire, he also changed up as well. His changeup that he threw 23% of the time in 2024, he threw that changeup 19% of the time, so that went less. But more importantly, he started throwing his curveball much more in 2024. In 2023, he threw the curveball only 22% of the time. And then in 2024, he threw the curveball 31% of the time. So my quick notations is it seems like Jordan Montgomery went away from his bread and butter, his sinker, He started mixing around, throwing his changeup more and his curveball less. So there were some mechanical changes. So if you change back to what he was doing right, maybe you get some of that old performance. But it's for the Mets pitching department, for their front office to determine how much he's valued at. The chase rate for Jordan Montgomery in 2024 was actually off the charts, folks. He actually had a chase rate of 91%. That is elite, elite. So, some of those pitches he was throwing were quite enticing, but like how most guys fail, it's control and it's with leaving like kind of meatballs over the plate. I mean, he was ultra hittable last year, ultra hittable. So that wasn't good. That was not a good thing. Um, but I got to give him credit. Although he did leave a couple meatballs over the plate and that caused his ERA to go sky high, his hard hit rate was only 30%. So that is also another good thing. But, Jordan Montgomery's not a strikeout pitcher. Strikeout percentage is in the 4%. So there are some good things. There are some bad things with Jordan Montgomery. I'm not really deep diving into him. But let me know, would that be a guy that you'd be interested in if? I mean, it was only 1 year ago where he had success, and he had success down the stretch in the World Series run, and that is a pitcher that you would be interested in, possibly. But let me know. All right, so let's go to the next possible option, and I'm going through this list fresh. We're going through it together, so you're hearing kind of my fresh reaction as well. All right, so the last option that I saw was possibly going after Cardinals pitcher Eric Fedde. According to the Cardinals, they are currently open to listening to offers per Derek Gold of the St. Louis Dispatch. The 30-year-old had the 30-year-old, he's making $7.5 million in his current contract. And the thing about Eric Fedde that I do like, and is that the guy last year, and let me get it right. Okay, yeah, the guy last year ate up innings. He had 177.1 innings that he ate up, right? And that was the most innings in his entire career. The most innings in his entire career in 2023, he played in Korea. So, I mean, that is a guy that I would be interested in. In fact, on this list, if you look at Cease, I think ultimately the package would have to be way too high. Montgomery, the salary is way too much for the amount of talent that you're getting. Even if you ate up the whole salary, I just feel it just would be a very iffy deal for the Mets. And then you have to remember with Jordan Montgomery, if you're like, all right, you know what, we'll take him off your hands. He's not $22.5 million. He's over $44 million because the Mets are over the $300 million luxury tax Steve Cohen threshold. So that is something to consider. So that almost X's off a Jordan Montgomery. I'm answering the questions just as in my opinion, but still drop down your opinions. Don't let my opinions influence you. All right. So those would be the two dynamics. Cease, price too high in terms of prospects, and then Montgomery, way too much money to pay for a guy. I think there are other options out there, and one of those options being, Fedde. And I'm not saying the guy's a world beater, but last year the guy, 2-5 record, 3.72 ERA, which is he was pitched on two teams, 3.3 ERA, even better, 3.3 ERA. He had a very solid year, and he's not making a lot of money. Maybe the Cardinals, they're looking to recoup one or two good prospects. So let's look into Eric Fedde because I think he's a lot more intriguing at this point. I think he has a little better ceiling than a guy like Quintana right now. So that's why I would pass him up for Quintana too. All right, so Fedde, wow, last year, pitching run value, fastball run value, breaking run value, all in the elite category, 88, 87, 89. I mean, his his baseball savant numbers certainly do not blow you away. In fact, a lot of them are under 50%, which is less than the major league average. But, I mean, he's a guy that's been able to make it work. The hard hit rate against him is 59%, not great. I mean, his advanced stats really don't blow you away. His advanced stats, he's got a cutter, a sinker, a sweeper, a changeup, a four seam. He's got a 93 mile per hour fastball. I mean, this is a guy that if the Mets can get at the right price, he's an innings eater. I mean, that is like the famous term that, we used to use all the time. He's an innings eater. He will eat some innings for you. I mean, I think on a good staff, he's a number 4 or probably a number 5. I mean, ideally, I mean, this is why I don't think the Mets were really interested in him last year. His advanced stats just don't blow you away. There's not like one stat that I could say, oh, great. The biggest thing here is his extension. And the next biggest thing that I could say, and this is probably why he's been fairly successful last year, is his control isn't that bad. Not elite, but it is above average. So his control. And with the type of stuff he has, he needs control. And then he's got a pretty decent pitch mix. He's got, like I said, he's got 4 or 5 decent pitches with decent movement. Yeah, Eric Fedde is a guy I would take a flyer on because he's not making a lot of money, so he's not going to kill you with the luxury tax, and hopefully you wouldn't have to give up, any crazy price package. I mean, if you're going to have to give up like any high prospects or any like decent level prospects, it wouldn't be worth it. Like even let me propose this to you. And I'm not going to say what I would or would not do. Would you straight up, if the Cardinals called you tomorrow, Drew Gilbert for Eric Fedde? Eric Fedde, keep in mind, 1-year rental. Would you do it? The Cardinals, they come away with a decently high prospect. So, they seem pretty good. But would you do it? I'm not going to say if I would, but would you do it? Drew Gilbert, straight up Eric Fedde. Yes or no? All right, so let's leave it off there and let's kind of wrap things up. All right, so where do the Mets stand right now? Obviously, that was a question I posed in the beginning, and what do they need to do? Obviously, they're not standing well with 2 starting pitchers being injured, but what should they do right now? That was a question I asked in the beginning of the video. All right, I apologize. I had to pause the video for a moment. I had my dog getting a little restless, so I just had to give her a treat. But okay, let's get back to this. Expectation. What is your expectation? What do we think David Stearns and the New York Mets are going to do right now? And I think that expectation all revolves around the word leverage. Right now, as we mentioned, that sorry about that again. Okay, so all about leverage. So right now, as we stand, we lost 2 starting pitchers. And based upon that, our leverage is not so good right now. We can be viewed as being a bit in a desperate situation. In fact, I think we are. And that is why I fully expect David Stearns to make a move. Do I expect him to make a move for a top starting pitcher like Dylan Cease, Michael King, Luis Castillo? That might be a little far of a stretch, because of the fact right now we've been dealing from a position of desperation, not a good position. When we deal with those teams, I think David Stearns wants to be dealing from a position of strength. Like, okay, we have 4 or 5 pitchers in our rotation, all pitching at a phenomenal level. Yes, obviously we need a Michael King or Dylan Cease to bolster our rotation, but we're fine either way. So that gives that puts them in a situation where they're not desperate. Now AJ Preller knows we're desperate. So the Mets right now, I believe, to kind of take away some of the brunt of all these loss of innings, they have to get a guy, whether it's a Quintana, whether it's an Eric Fedde, whether it's one of those guys. I think they have to make a move. Again, a guy like Jordan Montgomery, if for it to work for the New York Mets, the Texas Rangers would have to eat a portion of that salary. They certainly would have to eat a portion of that salary. But, if you're the Rangers, if they're eating half of the salary, they better be getting a decent prospect back in return. And if you're the Mets, would you want to give a decent prospect back in the return? It's a very complicated trade. The only thing that makes it less complicated is if the Mets take on the full salary or most of the salary. But why would you want to be paying double for a guy of Jordan Montgomery's skill level, especially when last year you had the chance to get him and you passed on him as well? So that Jordan Montgomery is kind of hard. I mean, other guys we didn't talk about, Luis Castillo, that his trade value, his trade ask was already ridiculously high before this. I don't know if it was a situation where the Mets or another team was asking for Seattle to eat some of the contract. I don't know if the Mets choose to eat most of that contract. Maybe the price goes down. I don't know where Seattle and the other teams were in their contract asks. But at this point, I fully expect David Stearns to make a move because, again, what if tomorrow or next week you wake up and Kodai's got shoulder soreness or David Peterson's got some type of strain? I wouldn't be surprised because those are the guys who have a very big pitching history, very big history of being injured, especially recent injury. I'm looking about recent injury. Both those two guys were injured last year. Peterson a couple months and Kodai Senga the whole year. So I mean, folks, we gotta do something. I mean, and it's tough. It's tough because when you invest $330 million, you kind of box yourself up. You box yourself up. But if you're David Stearns, you knew this from the jump. You knew this from the jump. So when we were like at $160 million payroll, you knew that re-signing a 33-year-old Manaea could have been risky. I said it last year, changing his mechanics, that type of torque, I'm telling you, it could have led to an injury, and it did. It did lead to it. When you have that type of unnatural new movement and you're a 33-year-old, what can you expect? And David Stearns invested the most in him as a starting pitcher. That is where the most of the starting pitcher, they invested about $75 million in the starting pitching rotation. 75 to 80 million. 25 million goes to Sean Manaea. So a bulk of their budget for starting pitching is going to Sean Manaea. So it stinks that he is out. Other guys, they got value. They got 13 million Combs, 13 million Senga, around that, maybe a little more, a couple million. But, losing your guy. So, okay, so let's look at that. Manaea, 33-year-old who changed his mechanics, a lot of torque, not surprised. So they knew that he was a big risk. Clay Holmes, converting him, that may work out, but also, that's new. Kodai Senga, they knew that he was a guy who was injured. He was a guy who was injured last year. And in Montas, they knew Montas was a guy who was injured. So you figure that if you're going to pick up two pitchers, and they chose to get Montas and they chose to get Manaea, knowing that they had Senga, knowing that they had Peterson, and knowing that those guys have injury history. So then you go sign guys, Manaea, I was fully on. So, I'm being a hypocrite right now. I'm not saying it was a bad move, but I'm just saying that, you have to assess risk. And you give $25 million to a guy who's 33 years old, who's only had one good year. Again, I said to do it. So I'm not saying, but, David Stearns is not me. He has to look at the big picture. So if you're two guys and they invested 25 million and 17 million. So quick math, $42 million in starting pitchers. So, they could have gave two guys $20 million apiece, but it looks like their starting pitching budget was around $45 million because they did side Griffin Canning as well. So, I mean, it's not enough. It's not a lot. I mean, if you say, hey, I'm going to give you $50 million about to fix your rotation, the Mets had nobody going into 2025. So it was tough. It was tough to do it on a limited budget, but the two guys that they did end up getting were injury prone. I mean, even as recently as 3 weeks ago, you could have got a guy like Nick Pivetta. Now, Nick Pivetta is not a world beater either, but I believe he's a guy who's been fairly healthy, and I'm just checking that right now. But I mean, last year he pitched 150 innings, 2023 142 innings, 2022 180 innings, 2021 160 innings, and then before that his injury shortened season. So I mean, he's dealt with a couple things, but he's pitched about 150 innings a year for the last 4 years. I mean that's a guy that I'm not breaking down a door to get some, but it's not tough. It's tough, but you know what? In a situation like this, I would expect David Stearns to continue to get creative. Now, there's still time between now and opening day, so the door is not shut on trades. The door is certainly not shut on anything. So we could see a whole slew of moves. But the thing that I'm a little upset at right now is I said this a couple weeks ago. If guys start going down, especially multiple guys, you are now dealing from a position of desperation. And that does not bode well for your negotiation leverage. All right, so let me know what you think, folks. How devastating is this move? How devastating is this injury? And yet, we don't know the extent. If it's just a move where he comes back in sometime in April, yes, it shouldn't be that bad. But if it's something, even if he does come back in April and it's something that lingers, folks, the guy's 33 years old. So let me know, how devastating do you think? Because I think it's, in my opinion, it's not good. It's not good. And also I'm gonna allude back to the fact that every game matters in the National League when it comes to trying to make the playoffs, because there's so many good teams. So many good teams. Just go to our division, Phillies, Braves, and even in the Nationals have been beefing up their team. So drop your comments. Let me know. Like, subscribe. Have a great day, folks. I appreciate each and every one of you. You know that. Thank you for giving me your time, your ear. If you stay till this long in the video, let me know by drop just put a number 20. Let me know. Drop a number 20. Thank you so much. Apologize for the little doggy barks. She keeps losing a treat. All right, folks. Have a great night.